are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. You know, one of the things that we've really appreciated is for years we broadcast from 1 to 3 on a national network. We will continue to do that. But we've added this particular hour from 12 to 1, which is primarily heard by people in the state of Texas. And this has allowed us to do some things that I think are really important. For years, I've been paying attention to some of the problems in the city of Dallas. But it's been difficult to always focus on those, because if you talk about Dallas or you even talk about Texas, people in 41 other states are going, well, I'm only slightly interested unless it happens in my town or in my state or my city. So this hour, when we have a majority of you in the Dallas area listening to this, and I recognize some of the others of you that are listening from other places like Minnesota and elsewhere, I think you'll benefit from this as well, because what is happening in Dallas probably will be happening elsewhere. But we are privileged to have somebody who I've certainly been following afar, individual that has been on a number of radio talk shows with Rick Roberts and people like that. He's done a number of speaking engagements. I've watched some of his YouTube videos. His name is Nick Novello, and he was born in Bronx, New York, and served in the Navy, and then, of course, has been in the area of law enforcement, has been really 3 decades behind the wheel of a Dallas police patrol car. And that is certainly enough. We could thank him for his service. But he's also really wanted to talk about police reform and really educate us about what might be considered the dire situation of the Dallas police force. So I just think it is great that you could come in the studio today and talk about some of these important issues.
Well, it's a real privilege and a pleasure for me to be here.
And again, thank you for your service. And also, a little bit later, we might even share some of your conversion, because it's a powerful story as well. But let's get into this, because anybody that's been paying attention to this has seen you on television, heard you speak on various issues, and we recognize that we're putting our citizens in danger. Nick, one of the things I sometimes say when we talk about Second Amendment is when seconds count, the police are just minutes away. But in the case of Dallas, sometimes they're an hour away. Talk about that, if you might.
Well, you know, Kerby, a good many things that I've posted to my Facebook account in the interest of the public welfare show that Dallas has become, quite frankly, dysfunctional. When I spoke before the city council in August of 2017, I made a number of statements, and one of which was that in a free and open society, the first requisite is order.
Yes.
And that's my job. Mm-hmm. Well, in Dallas, they've undermined that. You know, I want to make a point that's so important regarding the policing function in America. Right now, we have a system based on consent. And that system of consent is based on trust, that we're within constitutional context in how we do our jobs. Well, I submit to you today in America, it began with President Obama. But that trust has been undermined to the point where it's no longer tenable, particularly among black and brown communities. So what I see happening, and I'm not clairvoyant, but I'm still working, we're morphing into a system and moving away from consent. And if we're not careful, we're going to have a policing function based on coercion. And that's where we are moving. We're moving towards a monolith. Initially, when I began to speak, I thought what I was speaking to was specific to Dallas. And then I came to find out that every major city in this country run by liberal progressives have done this to the policing function. There's chaos in cities, but I will be very specific to Dallas. My talking points are principally driven by the fact that if we can't do what's fundamental to the policing function, answer your calls for service, then what is one to make of prostitution, gambling, gang activity, other white-collar crime dynamics, I submit to you they're not being addressed in Dallas right now.
Well, and part of that issue, as you said, is consent. You know, the assumption was, and we would teach our children, and our parents taught us, that if a police officer says, get out of the car, even if you think he's asking you to do something you shouldn't do, you better get out of the car. If they say, keep your hands on the wheel, you keep your hands on the wheel. You know the drill. But when all of a sudden people say, no, I'm not going to do that, and all of a sudden now to even get somebody to do something, you have to coerce them, you have to use physical force, you have the situations we have right now. True?
Oh, this is very true. I will say to you that in Dallas, I would say the policing function in Dallas is, to some degree, shut down. Mm-hmm. Let me make a point, because this is very, very talked about right now, and I'm referring to the Citizens Review Board.
Review Board. I was going to get to that, so I'm glad you brought it up.
I've got to tell you, and I'll say this on the 27th of February before the City Council. You know, the ability of the Dallas Police Department to maintain its integrity and do its job largely rests in its ability to discipline its employees fairly after a due process is done. Well, if we cede that to an external body that knows nothing of what we do and why we do it and has an animus for us, what you're going to see in Dallas is literally the police department shut down. And I don't understand where really and I say this, I know it's true, the fact that we haven't done a good job with that rests with the chief and the command staff. And Kerby, I went to the FBI on a chief.
I know you did.
Yeah, alleging criminal conduct. They interviewed me one time, I'm alluding to public integrity, and quashed the investigation. So where does the lack of transparency rest here? With the higher up, certainly not with the rank and file. So my question is, number one, will a policy like this work if you don't democratize it? You're telling me you're going to watch the rank and file for their conduct violations. How about the chief and the command staff and others? Are they going to be absolved from what's happening? And to touch upon Kevin Felder's situation now, he's a sitting councilman, and he's being investigated for a hit and run.
That's
people
right.
are watching that.
That was in the news, yes.
Yes, sir. So people are watching that. Are we going to democratize accountability or just talk about the police? Because I submit to you, and I say it publicly for public consumption, if we shut down policing in Dallas like we have in New York, San Francisco, L.A., and other major cities, we're going to see the vacuum filled with some form of a monolith, and that monolith will not be consistent with our civil liberties as we know them and practice them.
You know, you mentioned San Francisco. Since I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I've been following that. And because the police won't do their job, a lot of these businesses are hiring basically security-type guards, which have not had the kind of training that you and your colleagues have had. And that's a concern as well, isn't it? Well,
Kerby, it's a big concern. I would submit to you that we don't have any reference points for where we are right now in the country. And again, it needs to be said, we're in full rebellion before a holy God. And God's given us the ability to choose. And I had a guy that I was talking to, he got very upset. Well, look at what your God has done. Look around you. And, I couldn't help but, of course, I do it with as much civility and compassion as I can. But I said, let me ask you a question. Would you resent God telling you how to live? And he said, you better believe I would. I said, well, then look around, because you're seeing the fruits
That's exactly right.
of the decisions men have made.
Yes.
But they will be held accountable for these decisions, and that's where we are. Kerby, my narrative today is morphing into calling out the church for her silence. Where are you as we go through cultural, trauma that requires you to speak to your biblical mandate, and they're not?
Well, let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and certainly the responsibility of the church to speak to those issues. And again, many of you will have a chance to watch Nick in front of the City Council and others, and we're going to continue our conversation, and a little bit later open up the phones if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
It was a grand experiment, declare a war on poverty, and years later celebrate a victory. Unfortunately, poverty won the war. The percentage of people in poverty today is just slightly lower than the percentage in the 1960s when the war to end poverty began. Now, people living in poverty now are doing better than decades ago, but we certainly have not eliminated poverty. Peter Cove has a bold vision. The title of his book is Poor No More, Rethinking Dependency and the War on Poverty. He contends that the only thing that really helps end poverty is work itself. That was the foundation of the 1996 welfare reform bill, but hasn't been the focus for some time since. He understands the problem from the inside. He is founder of America Works, which is the first for-profit welfare-to-work company. He has created more than 1 million jobs for welfare recipients through various endeavors. He concluded that many of the government programs were not helping individuals because they stressed education and training over work itself. In the end, they had very little real-world work experience and were still dependent on government largesse. America Works instead offers employment services to state and local welfare agencies with the aim of placing welfare recipients in jobs quickly. Trainers work with clients on the basics, maintaining a business-like personal appearance, speaking properly, preparing a resume, and showing up on time. Clients quickly learn that success depends on their own self-discipline and on their own motivation and effort. Given the poor success rate of existing welfare programs, you would think that bureaucrats and politicians would be open to new ideas and concrete suggestions from people who have worked in the field. You would be wrong. Many liberal groups seem like they merely want to double down on the failed programs. That's why Peter Cove's book and ideas deserve a hearing. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. Two brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, in theaters February 22nd.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us is Nick Novello, and he'll be with us for the entire hour. So if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Take some phone calls. If you find yourself saying, no, I just want to listen, but I'd like to leave some comments, we have that available to you as well, because we not only broadcast, of course, on pointofview.net, but also on Facebook Live. There's a place where you can leave some comments, and I'll look for those in just a few minutes. But, Nick, one of the things you talked about is this Citizen Review Board. Now, we all recognize that every once in a while you get a bad cop. You know, every barrel sometimes has a bad apple. But if you take the responsibility for disciplining that person away from the people that are in authority over them and give it to someone else who knows nothing about the kinds of issues you're dealing with, you end up with what you've already started seeing in other cities that are so-called blue cities run by liberal progressives, don't you?
Well, you certainly do. And, bottom line is you shut down the policing function. You literally shut it down. If you ask a physician if he wants his work to be evaluated or assessed by a panel of people who know nothing about his profession, it's almost laughable. Same thing with a plumber, a carpenter. So I guess the assumption is that people who know nothing about what we do and why we do it can sit and judge us that way. But, Kerby, I want to make a point. Things happen, well, they don't happen by happenstance. This is all by design. Mm-hmm. The policing function is being undermined across the country. And as we see this and we see the lawlessness becoming entrenched in various cities, I mean, in major fashion. In Dallas, we have the federal government entrenched in East Dallas, and they boast we're cleaning that up. Well, really, it's more an admittance that we couldn't clean it up. We couldn't do a job. You know, I'm going to say this, and it's going to upset a lot of people, but one of the problems in Dallas is my conversation morphed from particulars to more having to do with financial improprieties. It upset a lot of people. Mm-hmm. One of the things is that, you know, there's a tax on cell phone use, mm-hmm. and that tax, it's a small tax, but it's specific to fund first responders. And I understand in Dallas that tax is used for purposes other than that.
There you go.
So when, you know, the mayor's on record is saying, you know, first responders, well, police are pistol whipping people for their benefits package. Well, my question's always been, Mayor, if we're 1,000 officers short, and I submit to you we're 1,000 officers short, and we're paid 15, 20% less than our area or contiguous cities, well, then where is the money going? We're probably number 1 or 2 in the nation for commercial real estate development. We're awash in money, and yet the mayor tells folks we're broke. There's a real disconnect here, and to highlight the disconnect, as recently as 2 weeks ago, DPD made the public announcement that we have 1,800 officers working patrol in Dallas. Well, I participated in the patrol bid in January, and there's only 1,235 officers participating, many of which there are in non-patrol functions just in that to boast the numbers. So my question is simply this. What happened to 600 officers almost overnight?
Well, and again, you raised another question that we were going to get to, so let's talk about it right now. You're a police officer in Dallas. You can just go up to Plano, Allen, McKinney, wherever, Carrollton, and you can get paid more, you know, and you can see real quickly the problem that you have in terms of having an adequate police force to deal with the kinds of issues that you have to deal with there in the city of Dallas. Fair?
Oh, that's an absolutely fair assessment. You know, people ask me, Nick, why do you speak and what do you want? Well, I speak because I know I have a biblical mandate to speak to the truth. And what I want to see is it's two-pronged. You have to staff adequately, and in order to staff adequately, you need a market-driven wage. Those two things begin to happen, and basically my narrative comes to an end regarding these issues. But when you see the chief at Central send us out to work, and the detail sheet reflects assigned strength for the day 14, and there's 2 of us, 3 of us. In one instance, my partner and I go to the hospital to sit on a prisoner, leaving 0 officers. Kerby, 0 officers available to answer calls, and yet these people act as if my speaking to this is some form of a major violation, alerting the public that they are in danger, alerting my colleagues that we're in danger. And then the city says, well, Nick, this is past your purview. You should not be speaking to this. Well, the oath that I took was taken before God and man. It wasn't taken to protect the department, wasn't taken to protect the badge. We are servants of the people.
Well, and again, talk about that, because if you only have 1 or 2 people or 1 patrol car available to take any call, we get back to the issue of response times. And you've looked at some of those response times, haven't you?
Yes, sir. I've posted a number of things where response times for priority 1 calls, and this the department says, well, let me say this. I mean, Councilman Griggs sent me some data points, and he said, how accurate are these? Yes. I got them from DPD. Mm-hmm. Priority 1 calls, which are lights and sirens, responded to in 2 minutes. Priority 2 calls, which are domestics, fights, possibly cuttings and what have you, responded to in 4 minutes. Well, of course, I told him those numbers were plucked out of thin air. So when he insisted on more accurate numbers, they were about 400 to 500% different than the numbers he initially got, which, Kerby, begs one question in my book. How many government documents are being doctored to maintain this false front that we're actually getting the job done, because we're not? One example that should incense people. The young lady that was murdered on Channel 6 in North Dallas, the next day the paper ran a story. Her body was discovered by the authorities. They left that nebulous. Discovered at 9 p.m. Well, how is that possible if the call sheet reflects we didn't get the call till 9:18? And then, quite frankly, her body was discovered by a co-worker. Firemen violated the general orders to go in and see if they could save her. And then we showed up at about 10:49 p.m. It's unacceptable. This was a life that, for all, I'm going to say it, I don't know that we could have saved her had we responded. But the call sheet in question, Kerby, showed no officers available.
Right. And you've had some, I've watched some of your videos where there was one that was a priority one, and it was a shooting on a highway, if I remember right, a freeway. And it took an hour or something like that?
You know, Kirby, it's interesting you raised that because I showed that when Mayor Rollins and I had a meeting, and I sat in his office. I showed him that. And I said, Mayor, look, a shooting. And then I showed him another call of a man lying on the pavement, robbed, bleeding, no police response because there were no elements available.
None available.
And, you know, the mayor's response to that was almost cavalier. And I understood, again, am I talking to someone who doesn't understand? No. I'm talking to someone who's got an agenda in place. You know, if somebody says, well, sum this up, Nick, sum this up. Well, Kirby, as we morph from one policing paradigm into another, quite frankly, in the mayor's image, what he and the council do not want the citizens to know is that crime is off the charts. We're simply not. We're doing mop-up work. We're not giving you any real-time policing in Dallas. And in certain instances, we do real-time policing when we have the officers available. But for the most part, it's all mop-up work right now.
Yeah, and what you mean by that is that the crime has been committed, the assault has taken place, the robbery has taken place. You show up, take some records, and put them in a file somewhere, put them on a computer somewhere. But you're not preventing the possibility of that taking place in the first place. True?
Oh, very true, sir. You know, I think nationwide you find the patrol function something like this. You spend 60% of your time answering calls. The rest of your time on your beat, you do preventative, type patrolling.
Work the beat.
Talk to people. Yes, sir. Work the beat. We're not doing that. Yeah. We're going from call to call to call. And I said this, that back in 2017, that inverse relationship between stress and performance was going to kick in, become a real problem. And so I'm on record as saying that the Amber Geiger shooting, I personally believe that some components in that were stress and fatigue. Mm-hmm. I believe they're going to make that argument. I believe if they depose officers who are presently working, they're going to make that argument and say a very real dynamic in my work environment is stress and fatigue.
You can't think of a more stressful environment. Well, you can only think of one or two other ones. I need to take a break, and when we come back, I'd love to get your comments, and I want to come back and get some comments about stress and what you've had to deal with and what your fellow police officers have had to deal with. But if you'd like to join the conversation today, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We have Nick in studio with us for another half an hour, and if you click on his website, there are all sorts of YouTube videos. So if you've never heard some of this before, you want to see some of the facts and figures and some of the other resources, it is available on the website there, and so we wanted you to have access to that. And if nothing else, I know many of you are prayer people that pray, and you might even pray about, was it February 27th? Yes, and so there is an opportunity there to make that a prayer target. But if you'd like to join us, let's take some phone calls too. 1-800-351-1212. Want to come back and talk about the stress on the job. And also, Nick, you'll share a little bit of your testimony. It's a fascinating testimony. I know our listeners would like to hear that as well. So we have a lot more to cover, but we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Nick Novello in studio, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I might just mention for just a minute that you're available for speaking. I think tonight you're at Highland Park Cafeteria, isn't that correct? And
yes, at 6:30.
6:30. So if somebody wanted to come out and meet you, shake your hand, I think it's one of the Tea Party events there, but I think you'd be willing to speak in churches or civic groups or things like that as well, wouldn't you?
I speak anywhere because, again, my narrative is not an academic conversation per se. I alert people that Dallas is in trouble.
Yes. And I think that's one of the things that we have to pay attention to, because when you have so many of our politicians saying, oh, it's all fine, it's fine, we don't need any more police force, we're doing fine, our response time is fine. You're just giving us a couple of facts and figures and just a few of many others that illustrate that as well. But before the break, you were talking about stress. I thought it would be good for just a few minutes. Nick, you've been a police officer for all these years. There's a fair amount of stress on police officers, even when you got somebody got your back, even when you don't have the problems that Dallas has. But now it does seem to me that we've taken a stressful job and made it more stressful. Would you agree?
Very much so. You know, I made a point of saying that, you know, when you take the job, you understand that there's the external stress that comes with maybe running into a guy with a gun, someone who wants to take your life, someone robbing someone. So that there's a real element of danger and stress.
Sure. But,
you know, Kerby, I submit to you today, maybe even more so, the stress is internal. A command staff that, and I'm on record as saying the Dallas Police Department command staff has abdicated their responsibility towards us. They're silent. They should be the ones going down to City Hall and saying, we need more manpower. We cannot send these people out in such denuded numbers because we're imperiling them. And so there is that stress that should you make a mistake, you're going to become, you're going to be held accountable when the environment for such mistakes and stress has been made for you by the administration.
And so, again, that's one of the other issues. Why don't we hear other Nick Novello types coming down and making those kinds of comments? Because, like you said, if indeed you're only sending out one patrol car, it would seem pretty obvious that you put that up the chain of command saying, I think we need more than that just to answer the calls that are coming in. And yet we're being assured that everything's just fine.
Well, yeah, this is true. And again, you know, I've gone on Rick Roberts' show twice to rebut official DPD commentary on crime. I released documents that I know has incensed the Dallas Police Department because it absolutely contradicts their official position. And I say that the Dallas Police Department disseminates information for public consumption based on one psychodynamic that people will believe what they prefer to be true. So if they have the department saying, we've got your back, you're safe, they really need to believe that, and so they will. I mean, never mind the actuality that crime is off the charts. And that's where we are. I released a YouTube piece, and I say, listen, if you want a photo op, a slice of pizza, and a cold drink, then come out and meet the chief. Just don't call us when you really need us because we're not coming. We can't come. We don't have anybody here.
Yeah, and again, that's back to response time and manpower and all the rest. Are there ways to solve this? I mean, some people might say, okay, you've obviously pointed to some very significant issues here, but are there some ways to reduce the stress? Are there some ways to increase the number, to reduce the response time to an acceptable number? What are some of the things you've proposed?
You know, one of the things I now propose, Kerby, number one, there's no trust in the command staff. And I'm very careful because I won't give an anecdote where I'm involved because this is the narrative. It transcends who I am. Mm-hmm. I speak because we're talking about the greater good, and I speak because I know I have a biblical mandate.
Right.
So I don't hold anyone responsible and think you should be speaking. I speak, and it's a privilege to speak. I love the Lord. I'm as broken as the next guy, but I know mercy and grace. God has shown me mercy and grace in Jesus, and but I'm always mindful. And I can't judge anyone because I'm broken as broken as the next person. But we all as Christians have a biblical mandate to speak truth to power. And in abdicating that mandate, we see things happening around us. And it's not wondering why they're happening. They're happening. And we know why they're happening. But yet, for whatever reason, I know a lot of people don't want to disturb their comfort level. Or they feel like, well, you know, God didn't really call me to that. Mm-hmm. Well, I submit to you, the scriptures do mandate that you speak truth. Yeah. So it's a privilege for me to be where I am. But again, my conversation is not, it's not an academic conversation. I tell the command staff, I tell the city council, this is a matter of life and death. When we have an officer, and God help us that it doesn't happen, we've lost 6 in 30 months. Should we have an officer hurt or killed? And then we can establish it was because there were no numbers available. You know, some months ago, I went on a citywide assist, and it was to another channel, Channel 5, from the channel I work, Channel 1. Well, really, if you look at that for what it is someone in dire need of assistance, an officer, and we're sending him help from channels that are 10, 12, 15 minutes away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the environment we are working in.
That's incredible. And again, back to the chaos that we're dealing with. I mean, you talk about speaking truth and love, but there's another aspect of that, and that is in Romans 1, it says God gave them over, a depraved mind. And we are dealing with a culture already that is moving in the wrong direction. And as a result, I've always said that politics and even what happens on the street is downstream from the culture. If the culture goes bad, it gets worse. And that's kind of what you're dealing with. So if there's ever been a time when we need to have a police force because we can't depend on consent and we can't depend on public virtue, then you really probably need more. And so isn't that interesting? Because if everybody was law-abiding, you could have a very small police force. But at a time when people are not law-abiding, you probably need a larger police force. So the very time when we have more chaos, we have fewer officers. And that if nothing else, you look at it from a Christian point of view, you can see the problem that we have right now.
Oh, this is well said. And I tell people, again, I don't endear myself to anyone when I speak, but we're moving towards a policing monolith in America.
That's true.
I believe shortly we'll probably see martial law. It'll probably start in maybe in Chicago, where there's such a murder rate.
Mm-hmm.
The homicide rate is absolutely off the charts, and then they're going to show that type of a monolith. People are misoneistic by definition. They resist change, so they're not going to voluntarily say, "Okay, we embrace this." But if you destroy what's in place, a system of consent, and then when it gets really bad, you say, we've got a solution, but it's not going to be very attractive. People will say, well, we want the solution anyway.
That's right. We had a guest on a while back that was just talking about how we're sort of militarizing the police force right now anyway, because as it gets worse out there on the streets, with Antifa or whatever those groups might be, it isn't one of those ones where you pull out a bullhorn and say, you need to disperse, and people say, and they start throwing rocks at you. You have a more militarized police force. And like you said, Chicago may be the first place that shows up where they simply say to bring any kind of control out of this anarchy, out of this chaos, is going to be something where people will give up their freedom, give up their liberty in order to have security. But it's going to be something that's going to look a lot more like a totalitarian regime, a lot more like a SWAT team, and a lot less like your local police force.
Oh, no, this is entirely correct. Kerby, when we have that moment and there is blood spilled, there's no telling. It'll be a collective national cathartic thing. There's no telling how long it'll go before it ceases. And then when it ceases and we look around us, you're entirely right. We'll see a structure absolutely inconsistent with our civil liberties. And once we lose those, I suspect we won't be seeing them again. People tell me, yeah, but you know what? I want to live an unencumbered life. I don't want the government in my business. Yeah. Well, then what you're really saying is you don't want freedom. You want license.
Yeah.
Freedom has context and parameters, and license doesn't. And again, the way I see it, biblically, license is rebellion before a holy God.
Yes.
And it's just telling him, like Nancy Pelosi said, we don't want God in our business. So God will allow you to have your way. But when it comes time to pay and be held accountable, and that's where I think the country's moving, and moving fast and hard. I don't know. I tell people, in my humble estimation, at 65 years of age, I believe I'll see Jesus in my lifetime. This is not sustainable the way we're living.
Well, we're going to take a break and continue our conversation. Nick Novello with us for one more segment, and then we'll let you head on. But again, don't forget, if you'd like to hear him tonight, Highland Park Cafeteria, and you'll be talking to some of the various patriots there. And if you would like to know more about him, you can click on our website, pointofview.net. We have a link. You can watch those videos. It'll take you a long time to watch all the videos we've loaded up there, so you can see some of those and watch them and pass them on to your friends. Matter of fact, I might even suggest that as you're listening to this right now, you might say, I need to pass this on to some other people that maybe did not know all of this. And so there's an opportunity to click on the share button and pass it on. Put it on your Facebook page, put it on your Twitter feed, and you'll get some comments. I'll guarantee it. We'll take a break. Come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1919, American mothers who lost their sons in World War I set about developing a war memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland. And there it has stood in peaceful silence for over 90 years, a visible reminder of the cost of freedom. But in October of 2017, a three-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit reasoned that because these mothers chose to memorialize their sons with a cross-shaped monument reminiscent of the grave markers of the thousands of American soldiers buried across Europe, the monument violates the Constitution. Not all the judges agreed. Chief Judge Gregory issued a strong dissent, reminding the court that the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment does not require the government to purge any reference to religion from the public square. He concluded, quote, "This memorial stands in witness to the valor, endurance, courage, and devotion of the 49 residents of Prince George's County, Maryland, who lost their lives in the Great War for the liberty of the world. I cannot agree that a monument so conceived and dedicated and that bears such witness violates the letter or spirit of the very Constitution these heroes died to defend," unquote. We agree with Judge Gregory. This is a veterans memorial. We will not break faith with the Gold Star mothers and the American Legion veterans who chose to remember their sons and brothers with this cross-shaped memorial. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Nick Novello in studio with us for a few more minutes. And, you know, one of the individuals we've had on this program many times is Mike Huckabee. He's been a governor, used to listen to this program when he was a seminary student at Southwestern Baptist Seminary, and, of course, a presidential candidate. And he used an illustration a while back that I pick on every once in a while. He said, let me tell you about two different cities or two different towns. One, we'll call it Hucktown. There, hardly anybody gets divorced. Nobody really uses drugs. Kids are really obedient. And guess what? The police force is pretty small. The cost of government is very limited because the culture takes care of itself. He said, now contrast that with your town, with the divorce rate, with all sorts of people using drugs, with the crime rate so high. There, they have to spend an enormous amount of money on the police force. They have to spend money on drug testing. They have to spend money dealing with all the vandalism and all those kinds of things. And I think it's, Nick, kind of the illustration that in a culture where people have biblical values, where you cultivate public virtue, maybe you don't need as much of a police force because people do the right thing. But when we have a culture right now that's just coming apart and chaos, we need to depend on you all the more. But you can only put, even if you could spend all your money, you can only put a police officer on each corner. People are still going to do things. And so this is the problem that I think everybody's facing. Number one, some of these liberal progressive cities are cutting the police force and handcuffing them in a very significant way. And number two, the culture is kind of flying apart. And like you said, when you have this kind of licentiousness and decadence, we need to depend on those of you in law enforcement like never before. And you're not getting the kind of respect that you deserve.
Well, we're certainly not, and I always tell people I'm very mindful of the fact that again, in a free and open society, we do the job based on consent.
Right.
And we hope the public trusts us. But, Kerby, it's a very difficult conversation to negotiate because I talk to representatives at times of the black and the brown communities. And, let me quote Terrence Cunningham. In 2016, he was the chief of the International Police Chiefs Association.
Wow.
So he was speaking, and he said, I want to make a comment. We in policing have done some very unspeakable things to the black community because of some very bad laws on the books. And people went, wow. Well, fast forward to today, those laws are, for the most part, still on the books, and we're still doing them. Mm-hmm. So it was a cathartic moment. We need police reform. Kerby, one of the things, I don't know how do you begin to tell a guy who's done 20 years for marijuana possession, and he gets out 20 years later and he finds that there are people in America making millions doing what he went to prison for 20 years.
That's right.
So it's a very fluid situation, but we're not speaking to it. We're using labels. If I ask an officer why certain policies in place are my entire police, if I ask a black or brown person, and I am a minority myself, obviously, but if I ask a minority person, why are you pushing that agenda? Well, then I'm racist. So we're using labels. We're not having conversations. And I submit to you, until we sit down and define the problem, I don't understand how we can even begin to speak to a solution for where we are.
One of the people we've had on this program a couple of times is Heather McDonald, and she coined the phrase the Ferguson effect, in which after Ferguson, there were police officers, and this has now been well documented even by a liberal at Harvard University, who found that actually police officers tend to be more tentative around African Americans for fear that they'll be the next individual that will be pilloried in the press and accused. So at a time when, first of all, we don't have enough police officers, you have some that are afraid to do the kinds of things you used to do in terms of police work. True?
Oh, that's very true. It's what I alluded to earlier about trust. A lot of folks in the African American and Hispanic communities no longer trust us. They don't call us. And when we show up, it just seems that there's a lot of resistance to our being there. And so, again, when these things become very difficult to deal with, and we can't deal with them based on that, a program where it's trust, it's consent within the constitutional context, and then we'll see it morph into a monolith, a policing state. I think the military will probably get involved at some point in time. But, see, one of the things I fear for Dallas and this federalization of the department is a possibility.
We forgot to bring that up. Yes, talk about that.
Kerby, should that happen, and should the federal government say, listen, we've got some grant money, we're going to impose our standards, and so we're going to get a lot of people in there right away. People will think, well, wow, that's great. But at what expense? It'll come at the expense of your local sovereignty. The officers working your streets will have a loyalty to Washington, not to you and the community. And so we're going to get away from a local policing the department, or should I say a local sense of obligation to the citizens who pay you and that you work for them. It'll be, I'm a federal employee, so you know what? This is the way it's going to be.
Yes, well, and again, anybody that says, well, that couldn't possibly happen, just look what's already happened in the field of education and a variety of other areas where the federal government's taken over so much. And there are certain things that the federal government should do. Protect the border. Not doing a real good job of that. Of course, we'll get into that later this week. Matter of fact, tomorrow on our weekend edition, and national security and things like that. But there are a lot of things that are best handled at the local level. Police, law enforcement, education, property taxes, all those issues, because after all, those are the people that you should be accountable to. So again, this is just another trend that is playing it out. But just before we go, share with us a little bit more about your own testimony, because a lot of people say, what makes Nick tick? They might just be going, this guy is really willing to get out there. But a lot of it has to do, as you said, with your Christian conviction, your belief that you should be speaking the truth in love, right?
Yes. I want to quickly say, I gave Jesus a lot of intellectual assent, just a lot of cheap lip service. I really butchered my life. At 57 years of age, I went home and was very upset. I was still talking about police corruption, but I had a lot of hatred in me. And then the Lord revealed himself to me. He does to a lot of people in different ways. Well, my conversion had 3 months to do with his taking himself from me. And it was a very difficult 3 months. I'm very grateful today because I hearken back to it. And so my life for me, when Jesus says in Luke 9:23 that you pick up your cross, you deny yourself, I know the word deny in Greek literally means you disown yourself. And so I know that Galatians 3:3 says you are dead and hid with Christ in God. In English, that kind of sounds weird. In the Greek, the word dead means you went to the cross with him and you're literally kept and you're part of who he is. But it's all his glory, it's his grace, his mercy, his strength. And so I don't really have, Kerby, people say you don't seem like you have much self-esteem. Well, I don't. Jesus is my self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jesus is my reason for being here, and he's certainly the only reason I speak. I would not be doing this but for him giving me a mandate to speak, and I'm always aware when I speak, I'm as broken as the people I speak about. So I don't judge them, but you have to speak to the fruits of what they're doing, and their fruits are undermining our cultural norms as we morph into more of a Luciferian paradigm.
Incredible. Nick, appreciate you coming in. I've kind of followed you from afar, and I'm glad we now have a context by which we can talk about what's happening in Dallas. February 27th, pay attention. You might even want to go and sit in the gallery and watch him testify, and I would encourage you to pray for him. And it's just great to have you on the program with us today.
Thank you, Kerby. It was a real privilege.
We do have a link to his website. Some of the various YouTube videos are available. There's quite a list of them, and just simply go to pointofview.net. Click on that picture there of Nick, and then it says visit the website, and then they all show up, and you've got all sorts of opportunities. We have some that are warnings, some that are testimonies, some that last a few minutes, some that last 30-plus minutes. And so, again, you'll find all sorts of great resources there. And if people want to contact you, they can do that as well and have you come and speak to their group or something else. So thank you for being in the studio. We're going to take a break. Alex McFarland will be with us. We're going to be talking about the abandonment of moral law. Boy, that fits very well with what we just talked about. A little bit later, Wesley J. Smith will be talking about euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide. We have a lot to cover, and we will do that right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. Happy Valentine's Day, and I do that as a warning for any of you men out there that forgot what day it is. There are consequences if you are married or even in a dating relationship to forgetting this day, so I thought I might mention that real quickly, but we're going to move on to lots of topics in the next couple of hours. First of all, we got our good friend Alex McFarland with us. We're going to be talking about the abandonment of moral law, and if you're not familiar with him, of course, he's been in this program and on this program many times before. As an individual that used to be with Focus on the Family, also served as a president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary, and of course now most of us know him as the director of Christian Worldview Center in North Greenville University, author of so many books, so most of them that have the number 10 in them, 10 issues that divide Christians, 10 answers for atheists, 10 answers for skeptics, 10 questions, and on and on. We can go through the long list, which are great resources available to you. But the article we've posted here is one that came out in Decision Magazine, but we have a link actually to alexmcfarland.com. The issue nobody is talking about: the abandonment of moral law. Alex McFarland, always love it having you on the program with us.
Oh, thank you, Kerby. It's always great to be on. I just hearing your voice encourages me and inspires me, and I appreciate what you do. And you mentioned it's Valentine's Day. I've got to tell you this. I saw a sign yesterday evening. I was driving down a highway, and there was a sign in front of a business, and it said, "Roses are red, violets are blue. If you forget February 14th, she'll dump you." So
that's a wise warning to our listeners here. So
all the men have time to stop and get a card or something on the way home today.
Let's hope that they do, because there are consequences to pay. Okay, the January issue of Decision Magazine, of course, we've posted the one that links to your website, alexmcfarland.com. You don't even have to spell his name, because we have a link there. But you actually say something that I thought was so powerful that I'm sorry it took a month to get you in here. But you have really said that one of the things we aren't paying attention to is the widespread cultural abandonment of a belief in natural law. Can you explain?
Well, thank you. First of all, Kerby, thanks for having me on. And, yeah, you know, it has been a puzzlement to me in recent years. While everybody's talking about, you know, the redefinition of marriage and gay rights and abortion rights, reproductive rights, now transgender rights, and parents can be, in some parts of the world, in trouble or under scrutiny if they insist that their male child be a boy and is masculine. I mean, we're just causing so many things to be ignored and redefined, and we're seeing all of reality as fluid. And the reason I wrote the article for the Billy Graham magazine, and it's going to be a book that comes out in July, is that there are what the Founding Fathers call natural law, or self-evident truth, or Aristotle, and some of the great thinkers throughout history, Aristotle onward, would have agreed with what I'm about to say. There are some things that are not matters of opinion at all. They're not preference or idea or subjective observation. It's just reality, like male, female, human physiology. And there are a lot of reasons that we are where we are, Kerby. But what I wrote the article was about was that our country and our founding documents and our legal system, our entire society like much of the Western world, but America uniquely presupposes natural law, moral truth, and a God who is the foundation of such reality. And all around us, we're seeing the denial of this, the suppression, really the suppression of awareness of natural law. And we get several generations into kids that really have never been taught morals and ethics and truth. And in fact, they're conditioned and bullied into ignoring some undeniable realities of life. We're headed for chaos. I mean, we're really headed for chaos. So people in positions of leadership, especially ministers in pulpits, have got to preach passages like Leviticus, Exodus, Romans, and 1 Corinthians and talk to their people about the undeniable realities of this created world, laws of nature that cannot, will never be, cannot be changed.
And again, I might just mention, as you were talking about some of those verses, that, of course, you do the program Exploring the Word on American Family Radio. But even for our listeners for a moment here that say, well, not really much about the Bible, just think about this, Alex, because the Declaration of Independence talks about self-evident truth, all truths, this idea of the laws of nature and nature's God, about providence and those kinds of ideas. And so whether you look at it from a biblical point of view, which those of us around the table do, or just look at it in terms of historic understanding of law, there's always been this idea of some kind of moral law, some kind of self-evident truth, and that is found not only in Scripture, but it's found in the founding documents of the United States of America.
Exactly. I mean, there are some things that are undeniably true. Now, I'm not trying to be scatological, and I'm not trying to be inflammatory at all, but I'll give you an example, because it is just beaten into our psyche now that gender is fluid. But I will say this. Any person born a male with XY chromosomes, they will never have a menstrual cycle. I mean, that's just natural law. I will bet all the money in all the world, in all the banks, males never have a menstrual cycle, because men and women are different. Now, men and women are equal in worth and value and personhood, and all the secularists of the world can thank the Judeo-Christian worldview for the concept of human rights. You know, Kerby, I was just teaching through the book of Judges, and when Joshua was parceling out the land, widows came and they said, you know, our husbands have died, but we still believe that we deserve to own land. And at a time when much of the world wouldn't have even believed that women had rights or value equal to males, Joshua gave land to the widows. And that's an early example, way in the Old Testament, of complementarianism, that men and women in the eyes of God are equal. But physiologically, men and women are different. That's just the birds and the bees, you know?
And we'll get into that in the next hour, because we're going to be talking about this new book, The Way of Hope, and get into this issue of sexual identity. But let me take a break. But when we come back from the mandatory break that we have coming up here, you also go on to say that the widespread abandonment and abandoning of morality obviously affects these rights that we talk about, freedom of religious expression, freedom to share the gospel, a lot of the religious liberty issues that, matter of fact, we'll be talking about tomorrow in our weekend edition. But also, you say, endangers the well-being and eternal souls of people, because this idea of saying that you can be anything you want, first of all, isn't biblical and it isn't biological, but also it's harmful. And so I want to come back and talk about this, because some of us might say, well, moral law, that's kind of great for you philosopher types. No, it has some very real implications. And Dr. Alex McFarland will talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
It was a grand experiment, declare a war on poverty and years later celebrate a victory. Unfortunately, poverty won the war. The percentage of people in poverty today is just slightly lower than the percentage in the 1960s when the war to end poverty began. Now, people living in poverty now are doing better than decades ago, but we certainly have not eliminated poverty. Peter Cove has a bold vision. The title of his book is Poor No More, Rethinking Dependency and the War on Poverty. He contends that the only thing that really helps end poverty is work itself. That was the foundation of the 1996 Welfare Reform Bill, but hasn't been the focus for some time since. He understands the problem from the inside. He is founder of America Works, which is the first for-profit welfare-to-work company. He has created more than 1 million jobs for welfare recipients through various endeavors. He concluded that many of the government programs were not helping individuals because they stressed education and training over work itself. In the end, they had very little real-world work experience and were still dependent on government largesse. America Works instead offers employment services to state and local welfare agencies with the aim of placing welfare recipients in jobs quickly. Trainers work with clients on the basics, maintaining a business-like personal appearance, speaking properly, preparing a resume, and showing up on time. Clients quickly learn that success depends on their own self-discipline and on their own motivation and effort. Given the poor success rate of existing welfare programs, you would think that bureaucrats and politicians would be open to new ideas and concrete suggestions from people who have worked in the field. You would be wrong. Many liberal groups seem like they merely want to double down on the failed programs. That's why Peter Cove's book and ideas deserve a hearing. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. Two brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, in theaters February 22nd.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation with Alex McFarland. Let me just mention we have a link to alexmcfarland.com, and that is an opportunity for you to subscribe and receive news and updates from him. Of course, there are all sorts of conferences and other resources available. Also, his book, Stand Strong in Your Faith, and so many other books, Abandoned Faith and others that certainly we're going to be talking about, all available at his website. But Alex, one of the things that you and I always like to talk about is what's the significance of that? We can spend our time talking about philosophy, apologetics, how to really return the country back to this idea of moral law. But as I pointed out just a minute ago in your article, you are focusing on the fact that we're not just talking about protecting our rights, as important as those are, in a conversation we're going to have tomorrow on our weekend edition, but also it really, as you said, endangers the well-being and eternal souls of people. Speak to that, if you might.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Mortimer Adler, who was the editor of Encyclopedia Britannica, he said, philosophy is everybody's business. Mm-hmm. And I agree, it really is. But the practical implication is this. Our Declaration, Constitution, Bill of Rights, our judicial system really is predicated on what's called natural law theory, that there are some moral truths. They're not invented by man. They're not preferences merely, but these are some universal truths that are undeniable. Well, either we run our country and base our laws and our liberties on natural law and the God who is the foundation of truth and reality, or the other option is progressivism, legal progressivism, or case law. So what's right is only as sure as the most recent court decisions from which current and future decisions will be based. That's why in May of 2015, the Supreme Court could believe that gay marriage is commensurate with heterosexual monogamy, is because they were looking at one of the big legal juggernauts that basically says we can subjectively make our own truth, and that's Roe versus Wade, that there's not a constitutionally protected right to life, that under the guise of either privacy or woman's choice or health care, and by the way, let me say, only in America could the death of a human being be called health care.
Yes.
But the legalization or the attempted legitimization of abortion set a precedent, that and some other things, that now we can make what we think are true decisions based on the most recent court decision rather than based on some timeless, transcendent principles. You know, one of the reasons I think that the left was so apoplectic about Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh is because they believe, like our founding fathers, in natural law, and presumably their court decisions coming from the U.S. Supreme Court would be based not on popular opinion, not on activists or marketers, but on timeless, eternal truths. So this idea of natural law, it's not just for the philosophers in the ivory tower. I mean, there are some things right, there are some things wrong, there are some things undeniable. Gender is not fluid. Kerby, I'll put it this way. In this world, there are differences between things. You know, alive is different than dead. Dry is different than wet. Male is different than female. But what's been drilled into the heads of elementary school through college-age, secular educated people for about 4.5 decades is egalitarianism, that all things are equal. And if we say, hey, not all things are equal, hungry is not equal to being fed.
Yes.
Terminally ill is not equal to being healthy. And heterosexuality is not equal to homosexuality or transgenderism. Now, what's a problem in so much of secular education, and certainly current politics, is if you say that there are differences, they're going to assume that you politically or with some sort of racial bias or some sort of angle, you're spouting off an opinion, or you're trying to assert political dominance over somebody, or you're chauvinistic or whatever. No, you're just using common sense. Now, it is possible to exploit people or to try to leverage truth, but when it comes down to natural law, and in the Bible, Exodus 21 through 17, the Ten Commandments, which even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Routinely invoked in his defense of the civil rights movement, and he was right on the money. But whether you invoke Scripture or just common sense, as Aristotle and Aquinas and Mortimer Adler would do, we're heading for lawlessness when all of our boundaries are set up, not based on what is morally right, but just based on who's got the loudest megaphone.
Wow. Let's take some phone calls real quickly, and we'll go to Missouri first. KTTK. Carrie, you're on with Alex McFarland. What's your point of view?
Well, every day I get a word of the day from dictionary.com. And in addition to my word of the day, sometimes they have little questions and comments about the way we use our words. Today, the comment was, what is the difference between gender and sex?
Whoa, good question.
Yeah, I clicked on it, and this is what I read. Keep in mind, this is not from the homosexual agenda. This is people who make up dictionaries, like Webster. Right. When two words have the same meaning, we call them synonyms. When two words have different meanings, but people use them interchangeably, we write articles about what those words actually mean. Take gender and sex. While people substitute one for the other on the regular, their meaning and usage are significantly and consequentially different. Because we most often talking about human beings, when we say these terms, it's critical that we get them straight. Give respect to get respect, right? What does the word sex mean? First, let's talk about sex, intercourse aside for these purposes. Sex is a label assigned at birth on the reproductive organs you're born with.
Yes.
It's generally how we divide society into two groups, male and female, though intersex people are born with both male and female reproductive organs. Important note, hermaphrodite is an outdated and offensive term and should not be used to describe intersex individuals. What does gender mean? Excuse me. Gender, on the other hand, goes beyond one's reproductive organs and includes a person's perception, understanding, and experience of themselves and roles in society.
Let me jump in real quick because we're coming to a break, but I think, Alex, that just illustrates the point. I mean, even the definition that we used to have is being sort of changed to a politically correct definition, and I wish I had a little more time to hear the whole definition, but I think we got the point, don't we?
Yeah, the word gender goes all the way back to Aristotle, and it really is from the word genus, which means, a classification or an order. And we're talking about the male gender, the female gender, different phyla or classifications. But now they want words. Yeah, it's interesting how the left uses words. They make them objective when it serves their cause, but they want their meanings to be fluid when that serves their cause.
Good. Kerry, appreciate that. I just was coming to a break, and I did want to mention just before we take the break and move on to our next topic that, Alex, of course, you have your Truth for a New Generation. People can go to the website and find out about that conference, which is taking place next month, and they can find out more about your books, and they can also schedule you to speak if you would like to have him come and speak to your church. So, again, we have all that information on our website, and so, Alex, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
God bless you, Kerby. I really appreciate all that you do. It's an honor to work with you.
I certainly appreciate that as well. We're going to move on to the next topic. By the way, Kerry, if you want to be with us the next hour, we're going to have Melissa Fisher, and we're going to get into that in more detail and talks about sexual identity and a number of things in her book, The Way of Hope. But before we take a break here, let me just mention that when we come back, I have also scheduled Wesley J. Smith, What Euthanasia Enthusiasts Really Want. And this is another one of those battles we've been paying attention to, and I wanted to use this today to focus on a couple of these very good articles, all of which are at our website, pointofview.net. So when we come back, Wesley J. Smith with us. We'll be back right after these messages.
Roadside Attractions presents Run the Race. Two brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question.
It's all part of his plan, right?
God does love you. He loves you like crazy.
From executive producers Tim Tebow and Robbie Tebow, Run the Race. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested. In theaters February 22nd. More information is available at runtheracemovie.com.
Jesus said you could find a person's heart by where they invest their money. We at Point of View could not be more thankful that so many demonstrate a love for truth and for this nation by investing in our common mission. Of course, the reality is our team, our truth team, is a small percentage of those who listen. And right now, as they say in sports, we could use a deeper bench. For those who have given, thank you. And if you haven't made that step yet, take one now. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Show your heart for our future. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Bring now to the microphone Wesley J. Smith, who is a lawyer and also an award-winning author, is the senior fellow at the Discovery Institute Center for Human Exceptionalism, and a couple of years ago had his book come out, Culture of Death, The Assault on Medical Ethics in America. And even if you don't have a copy of the book, we've also posted an article that came out shortly before that appeared in First Things, What Euthanasia Enthusiasts Really Want. And I thought it would be good to bring him on in light of not only the things that have developed in the last couple of weeks on the issue of abortion, but also the issue of infanticide and, of course, this issue of euthanasia. And so, Wesley J. Smith, always great to have you on the program with us.
Thank you, Kerby. How are you?
I am doing well and appreciate the writing that you've done over the years. And, you know, when I first started speaking on some of these medical ethics issues in the 1970s, there weren't as many things published back then, but I remember quoting quite frequently Paul Ramsey, in which we said that, you know, this argument for abortion really, in a sense, was also an argument for infanticide and even an argument for euthanasia. You write about those ideas, and the argument is that if I can take a life at the beginning, I could take a life at the end. If a life is inconvenient, arguments for abortion also are arguments for infanticide and euthanasia. And if I pay attention to what's happening in the state of New York, some of the comments by the governor in the state of Virginia, I think that's turned out to be true. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's really important for your listeners to understand who Paul Ramsey was and then who another early bioethicist pioneer named Joseph Fletcher was.
Sure.
Paul Ramsey was a theologian. He came to the new field of bioethics. This was back in the late 60s, early 70s, from a Judeo-Christian viewpoint. He was a deep believer Christian, and he believed in the sanctity, equality of human life. His most famous book is called The Patient as a Person. And what he argued there was that if somebody, for example, is dying and doesn't want to have extraordinary means to maintain their life, you should not force tubes on people and people into these very rigorous treatments against their will, because that's not to treat the patient as a person. He was kind of in an ideological struggle with Joseph Fletcher for the heart and soul of bioethics. Joseph Fletcher was a lapsed Episcopal priest, became an atheist, a crass utilitarian, and he said that being a human being is not what matters in terms of moral value, unlike Joseph Fletcher, who believed in the sanctity of human life. Joseph Fletcher said what matters is whether you have what he called criteria for humanhood, whether, for example, you are self-aware over time and this kind of thing. And in bioethics parlance today, that's called being a person.
Yes.
So in bioethics parlance, if you are self-aware over time, if you can value your own life, you're considered a, quote, person, close quote, which is a subjective term. And not all human beings in this view are persons. So that all unborn are not persons, newborn infants are not persons, people like Terry Shiva who had been persons but lost it due to illness or injury, like my Uncle Bruno Micheletti or my mother who died of Alzheimer's. Both of them died of Alzheimer's. They could be said to, in this view, have lost their personhood. And of course, these are incompatible worldviews. And what is really concerning is that when I started research on the Culture of Death book, and the updated version is called The Age of Do-Harm Medicine, that came out in 2016, I found that everything Joseph Fletcher ever wrote was in print and had really taken over much of mainstream bioethics, while almost everything Paul Ramsey wrote was not in print. That tells you who won that struggle. So what you see now in mainstream bioethics, not everyone, certainly not those who would call themselves, quote, conservative or a modifier like Catholic bioethics, but the mainstream view in bioethics has rejected the sanctity of human life, has rejected the equality of human life, and has adopted something like a quality of life ethic where some human lives, and in fact some animal lives, have greater value than some humans. and there is such a thing as a human non-person, and that leads you to the problem that you addressed at the opening of this interview.
Well, and again, since you mentioned that, Joseph Fletcher, of course, wrote the idea of situation ethics, and I remember when I was at the Kennedy Institute of Bioethics, one of the books we had to read was Humanhood, which was written by Joseph Fletcher, in which he said they may be a human being, but they're not a person. And of course, the argument is, since the 14th Amendment only protects a person, you come up with this arbitrary idea. So whether it is certainly some of the things that you've written about in terms of euthanasia, some of the things you've written about in terms of the war on humans, or everything that people can find on discovery.org/human, they're going to recognize that we shouldn't, I guess, be that surprised about what has happened here in, for example, the state of New York, with the signing of the governor signing that particular piece of legislation on the 46th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, or even some of the offhanded comments by the governor of the state of Virginia. It's, in some respects, the natural progression once you no longer hold to the sanctity of human life and determine individuals on the basis of their perceived value or their quality of life. True?
That's absolutely correct, because the sanctity of human life, the equality of human life ethic, says that human beings have ultimate value simply and merely because they are human. It is an objective measurement, meaning if you're a human being, you have equal value. And of course, in the West, we've been fighting for hundreds of years to attain that ideal, right? But if you reject that, if you accept the quality of life ethic, you're saying that some human beings have greater value than other human beings. That's been the basis of invidious discrimination since human life began. It's in a sense, it's akin to racism, only instead of having race as the invidious distinction, it's quality of life, or whether one is a person. Different, same evil, same objectification of human life, just different victims.
And again, some people might say, well, where does this end? Well, if you read your blog, you'll say, this has got to be a head scratcher or an eye roll, because the one that you posted, again, you can find this at Evolution News. You can find it, of course, at the link there at Discovery Institute. But the idea of a right to life for wild rights, you got to be making this up. But again, this gets into this nature rights environment. Explain that, if you might.
Right. And there's another aspect that I think we need to consider. What is the ultimate purpose of society? It used to be that it was the protection of innocent human life. That was the primary purpose of organized society, was to protect the lives of citizens. What has happened is that many have eschewed that as the ultimate purpose, and now believe that the ultimate purpose of society is to prevent suffering or eliminate suffering. If you accept that, that quickly becomes eliminating the sufferer, as in with some of the issues that you described, euthanasia as an example. It can also be eliminating the cause of suffering, which gets you into the abortion issue and gets you into infanticide, where if the baby is perceived to cause suffering for the mother or for the family, it becomes acceptable to kill that child. It can also lead to the idea of suffering of animals, which gets us into animal rights, which is different than animal welfare. Animal welfare, part of human exceptionalism, is we have an obligation to treat animals properly and humanely. That's human exceptionalism. Animal rights, a lot of people think that's the same thing. It isn't. Animal rights says that human beings and animals have the same value, because value is based on whether an individual, whether human or not, has the capacity to suffer. And since cows can feel pain and humans can feel pain, that means cattle ranching is the same thing as slavery. And they've also now gotten into the suffering, supposedly, of nature. So nature rights is actually a real thing. There are laws now being passed that actually grant nature the right to life, practically. It's the right to evolve and the right to exist and persist in evolution is what they call it. So you've got Ecuador has nature rights in its constitution. The nation of Bolivia has it. 30 cities in the United States, more than 30 cities now, have created the rights of nature. One of them, by the way, is Santa Monica. I grew up in Los Angeles. I know Santa Monica like the back of my hand. There's no nature left in Santa Monica, Kerby. So why would
Not really.
No, I mean, except the mackerel under the pier, everything else is completely developed. So why would Santa Monica, of all places, declare nature right? because it's an ideological statement.
Yes.
It's an ideological statement of the hard left wing that human beings are just another animal in the forest. And my fear is that that's how we declare ourselves, that's precisely how we will act. And for people who are rolling their eyes and saying, oh, that will never happen, it's already happening. 4 rivers have been declared to be person-type entities, rights-bearing entities, the Amazon, the Ganges, and 2 others, one in New Zealand and another one in India. 2 glaciers have been declared to be persons, and a Native American tribe declared wild rice to have rights as a way of protecting the wild rice. Well, all you have to do if you want to protect the wild rice is pass a law on native land saying we're protecting the wild rice. You don't have to declare wild rice to have rights, because that is anti-human.
Yes. Fascinating. We got a lot more to cover, and we also have some phone calls. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Wesley J. Smith with us. We'll continue right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1919, American mothers who lost their sons in World War I set about developing a war memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland. And there it has stood in peaceful silence for over 90 years, a visible reminder of the cost of freedom. But in October of 2017, a 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit reasoned that because these mothers chose to memorialize their sons with a cross-shaped monument reminiscent of the grave markers of the thousands of American soldiers buried across Europe, the monument violates the Constitution. Not all the judges agreed. Chief Judge Gregory issued a strong dissent, reminding the court that the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment does not require the government to purge any reference to religion from the public square. He concluded, quote, "This memorial stands in witness to the valor, endurance, courage, and devotion of the 49 residents of Prince George's County, Maryland, who lost their lives in the Great War for the liberty of the world. I cannot agree that a monument so conceived and dedicated and that bears such witness violates the letter or spirit of the very Constitution these heroes died to defend," unquote. We agree with Judge Gregory. This is a veterans memorial. We will not break faith with the Gold Star mothers and the American Legion veterans who chose to remember their sons and brothers with this cross-shaped memorial. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Wesley J. Smith with us. He is Senior Fellow at Discovery Institute Center for Human Exceptionalism, author of a number of books. But let me also encourage you, in addition to some of the things that we've posted here, follow his blog. He's got some material related to euthanasia, the Swiss suicide clinics ramping up deaths. He has some things that deal with the issue of abortion. In particular, one of the articles there, the Vermont abortion bill goes further than Virginia and New York's. But also, we've been talking about some of these ideas of animal rights. And if you've not had a chance to watch the particular piece that they put together, The War on Humans. It is about a half an hour, and you can watch the video, go to YouTube or something of that nature. So those are some resources that I would certainly want to commend to you. And so often he is writing about issues we discuss every single day here on Point of View. But let's take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. On the Good News Network in Georgia, Jonathan, what's your point of view?
Hey, guys. Hey, Kirby. Hey, Wesley. Hope you all are having a great day. Thank you also for your service to the ministry and educating people. I have a little bit of comment and two questions for you today.
Sure.
My first question would be a more general. What is the end goal of people who are pushing this matter so much, specifically abortion and infanticide and the like? And then my comments would be: is it something that we can look to history of the Nazi Germany and of Hitler declaring that eventually it was progressive, but eventually declaring that those of non-Germanic descent, babies are to be killed, and those that are vegetables or are physically or mentally impaired are useless and should be killed, to make room for injured soldiers to care for them instead of those people, and then to further create a master race. But that was his idea. But anyway, so I guess my first question would be, what's the end goal there? And then my second question is more practical. What can a 22-year-old living over here in Middle Georgia, what can he practically do to actively stand up against this? Because it's just flat out wrong.
Sure. And again, the idea of useless eaters, non-persons. Wesley J. Smith, your comments.
Right. It wasn't the Nazis, actually. It's eugenics. And the eugenics precedes the Nazis. Eugenics was started in England. Francis Crick, who was a cousin of Charles Darwin, decided that, we should start looking at the human race the way we do animal herds, and we should start weeding out the fit from the unfit. And in the United States, this really took off. In fact, there was a notorious, horrible United States Supreme Court decision called Buck v. Bell in 1927, in which a woman who had been born of a prostitute was put in a foster home when she was a teenager, raped, and because she got pregnant was put in a mental hospital. The eugenicist said, aha, this woman is immoral and unfit. She is the daughter of a prostitute who gave birth out of wedlock. She should be sterilized. And in a despicable decision, Oliver Wendell Holmes, 8-1 ruled, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And he allowed her, who had done nothing wrong, to be involuntarily sterilized. Well, this idea of the fit versus the unfit fit right into, the German National Socialist Party ideas. They actually created laws, their Nuremberg laws, which were eugenics, requiring sterilization. In the United States, about 60 to 70,000 people were involuntarily sterilized under the color of law between 1908 and the early 60s. And the Nuremberg law, the German sterilization law, was based on California's. So, it's very tough for us to judge. Now, what happened later is that this idea of infanticide and killing the disabled had been promoted in 1920 in a book called Permission to Destroy Life Unworthy of Life by two German professors, one a lawyer, one a doctor, Alfred Hoch and Karl Binding. And they said that there were 3 categories of killable people. And again, this is before Hitler was a dark gleam on the horizon, right? They said it was the people who were terminally ill, what they called pejoratively the idiots, people who had a terrible quality of life and cost the Reich a lot of money to care for, and people who were permanently unconscious, people of like Terry Schiavo might have been called. And they said that there was permission to destroy life unworthy of life. And so during World War II, Hitler he didn't require, but he allowed doctors to kill babies who were born with disabilities. They did require that babies so born, they required midwives and doctors to report them. But no doctor was forced to do any of that. And then they also killed adult disabled people kind of as a rehearsal for the Holocaust. So this comes from denying human exceptionalism, denying the equal value of human life. When you say some lives have greater value than others, it leads to repression, oppression, and can lead to killing and terrible tyranny. I would say the ultimate goal is certainly not racism. But people like Peter Singer of Princeton University who support infanticide, don't hate black people, don't hate Jews and things of this sort. In fact, he is Jewish. But they do have an invidious outlook on people and human lives that have, in their view, a lower quality, whether it's a significant cognitive disability or the unborn. I think the ultimate goal is death on demand, because that would be for anyone who thinks beyond a transitory state that they want to die, and that is actually being in some circles, the idea of the right to die is having greater credence than the right to life. It is certainly unlimited abortion through the 9th month, and infanticide if a baby does not fit the family's needs or would be deemed to be a burden on the family or the society. I would say that people say, well, that's slippery slope thinking. No, it's actually facts on the ground. Today in the Netherlands, as part of their euthanasia program, there is infanticide carried out. Babies born with serious disabilities or with terminal illnesses are killed by doctors. They are killed by doctors under color of law. It's called the Groningen Protocol, Groningen.
Wow.
And any of your listeners, Kerby, can look it up. It's a bureaucratic checklist as to how to decide which babies can be killed. And to show you the way the currents are going, the Groningen Protocol was published with respect and no significant pushback by the New England Journal of Medicine.
Wow. We all are just about out of time, and I wanted to do a couple of things. First of all, Jonathan's saying, what can I do? Well, we mentioned Francis Galton. You could type that in, or eugenics, and you could learn a little bit about that and maybe post something like that on your Facebook page. But I think the real answer, and since we're down to less than a minute, I think the real answer is for us to promote this idea of the sanctity of human life in a culture that no longer believes it. But if you want to get some good intellectual information and some background, you can go to discovery.org/human. We already, of course, have the link on the website there. You can watch the video, War on Humans. You can find many good blog posts. And Wesley J. Smith, it seems like every time we turn around, it's another one of those bioethical issues that you're such an expert on. So let me just simply say this is one opportunity, and we're going to follow up again with some other opportunities with you in the future. So it's been great to have you on the program with us today.
Thank you very much. And one quick point. Learn about this stuff and talk to the people in your family, your friends. That's how ideas are spread, through intimate contacts. If you know what's going on and you fight back against it with knowledge, we can defeat these agendas.
Well, again, we need to understand these issues. That's why we talk about them here on Point of View. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will focus on a resource that I think you're going to find very helpful, kind of help us understand this idea of sexual identity, how to respond to individuals that are certainly dealing with gender issues. So we'll be talking about that with Melissa Fisher right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
One of the things we talk about so often here on Point of View is this issue of homosexuality and sexual identity and gender confusion and those kinds of issues. And oftentimes we say, well, how should we respond as individual Christians and the church? And it seems to me that oftentimes we end up in one of two extremes. We end up having those who emphasize their biblical convictions, but maybe kind of low on their biblical compassion. And so they tend to be kind of legalistic and in some respects sometimes are perceived as condemning. You have others that react with their biblical compassion, but maybe lower their views of biblical conviction. And so they sometimes, if nothing else, actually condone certain kinds of activities. So I thought it would be very helpful for us to spend some time, first of all, learning about that issue and then thinking about how we as individuals and how the church should respond. And so I thought this particular book by Melissa Fisher would be very helpful. She's a writer, a speaker, and a church consultant. It is entitled The Way of Hope, A Fresh Perspective on Sexual Identity, Same-Sex Marriage, and the Church. It's published by our good friends at Baker Books, and it is available. And, of course, we also have information about it on the website, about 230 pages. And so you might be able to find it in your local bookstore. If not, we've certainly given you some links to that as well. And so, Melissa, first of all, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And I appreciate you sharing not only your story in the book, but I know you'll be sharing that with us today and helping us really kind of have some sensitivity and some understanding of some of these key issues. Might just mention that we also have gothewayofhope.com. And so people can find out about the book and about you and some of the other resources there as well. You grew up, I guess it's good to start with, as a tomboy. And tell us kind of your backstory, because that's, I think, absolutely crucial in understanding some of the ideas that you're trying to express in the book.
Yeah, I appreciate the invitation. So I grew up in a Christian home, very probably kind of framed in a little legalistic mindset.
Sure.
But grew up deeply trying to love Jesus, come to understand Jesus, know Jesus. And all the while having a love for the outdoors, a love for sports, a love for action and activity. And so growing up under kind of the label of tomboy, there were a lot of ways in which at times as I looked at other girls, I did feel a little bit different. And then trying to make sense of that framework as I went into the church, went into youth group, looked at other girls at church, other girls at youth group. I did start to feel a little bit different, probably from an early age. My parents divorced when I was 7, and my dad kind of took off after that and threw himself into work, so I didn't see him much. So I grew up with some abandonment wounds. And then through my mother's remarriage, had some struggles there. So I kind of grew up under a framework of chaos and church all mixed in together. So it was kind of at times really hard to digest and determine kind of what was what at times.
And again, one of the things you mentioned just in passing, I'll come back to, because in your chapter on the way of perfection, you talked about, trying to be a good little Pharisee, don't talk back, be in church, don't run in the store, use tissue, don't smack your gum, on the way down, be the best, make mom happy, check, 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 keep all the rules and all the rest. And that is part of that, and that idea of perfection that probably drove some of that in you as well, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Because, having grown up with parents that I did respect and with grandparents and just the church culture that I absolutely wanted to make them proud. That's really, I think, intrinsic in me. But what kind of got mixed up in the process is really learning that there was grace for imperfections, that this mixed message that I felt like I did have to follow the rules. I did have to get everything right. That not only was that really true at all, but it especially wasn't true when it came to Jesus and when it came to faith, because a lot of what I came to understand was kind of an Old Testament framework of God, that he would be in so many ways really upset, even kind of Old Testament angry if I made mistakes. So that's where, in some regards, I grew up with this framework of real fear, not kind of the awe fear, but a negative version of fear of him, which really added to the mix of challenge when it came to sorting out faith and sorting out sexuality.
Yes. In one of your chapters, you call it the way of secrets. And I started the chapter thinking, okay, the big secret. By the time I got to the end of the chapter, 8 secrets, okay? I mean, now some are major. You've sort of alluded to one, the divorce issue and what you had seen and all the rest. But I hadn't thought about that, but that's another thing. I mean, even at a young age, keeping secrets, my favorite line now is, because I do know a lot of individuals and a lot of people confide in me and all the rest. People would be surprised the number of secrets I have to keep as an adult, but that's not the same as being young and having, in some respects, family secrets and other secrets that also probably were contributory, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And, one of the things that we hope and pray for all of our local churches to become is a place where you can run to God, you can run to church, to bring about your burdens, to bring about your hurt, to bring out your hang-ups. And when, as a little girl, I thought not only did I have to be perfect, but anything that was showing up in my family that wasn't perfect, I had to cover, I had to hide, I had to deal with on my own. It made for a lonely growing up period. It also made for a really challenging way to live out relationally as I grew older in high school youth group and into college, friendships and relationships, really trying to figure out what does it look like to show up in a church setting and be authentic with what's going on. And if you can't really do that, then that starts to spill over and make it really hard to come to God with anything that's really going on. So you start to just even act perfect in front of him.
Well, and again, we should have churches, ideally, as a place where you can share some of those secrets. You can confide. And I would hope that we're doing a little better. There was a time when I remember talking to some individuals that say that they had been sexually abused, and when they would share it to the pastor, if they ever had the courage to do so, the pastor go, I just can't believe that, and which is not the best reaction at the moment, first of all, but also is just the fact that I'm hoping now we've created some kind of sense that the church should be, ideally, and of course we're getting to the conclusion, which we'll get to after we come back from the break, but we should create a situation in which people can be vulnerable, can acknowledge that they're broken, that there is brokenness, that there is sin, and those kinds of things. So I think that chapter on the way of secrets was something that I certainly wanted to address. But we need to take a break, and when we come back, we've only talked about 2 of the 10 chapters, and we will do our best to kind of summarize some of this. But the hope here is to really identify, how to respond and how to address some of these issues and to reach out to people in the community. So we're going to talk about what that really looks like. We've talked about the way of perfection and the way of secrets. We'll talk about the way of the monster, the way of medicating, the way of my waves, the way of hope, the way of community, the way of work, the way of more work, and the way of bravery. There's a lot to cover. We'll do our best with Melissa Fisher right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
It was a grand experiment, declare a war on poverty and years later celebrate a victory. Unfortunately, poverty won the war. The percentage of people in poverty today is just slightly lower than the percentage in the 1960s when the war to end poverty began. Now, people living in poverty now are doing better than decades ago, but we certainly have not eliminated poverty. Peter Cove has a bold vision. The title of his book is Poor No More, Rethinking Dependency and the War on Poverty. He contends that the only thing that really helps end poverty is work itself. That was the foundation of the 1996 Welfare Reform Bill, but hasn't been the focus for some time since. He understands the problem from the inside. He is founder of America Works, which is the first for-profit welfare-to-work company. He has created more than 1 million jobs for welfare recipients through various endeavors. He concluded that many of the government programs were not helping individuals because they stressed education and training over work itself. In the end, they had very little real-world work experience and were still dependent on government largesse. America Works instead offers employment services to state and local welfare agencies with the aim of placing welfare recipients in jobs quickly. Trainers work with clients on the basics, maintaining a business-like personal appearance, speaking properly, preparing a resume, and showing up on time. Clients quickly learn that success depends on their own self-discipline and on their own motivation and effort. Given the poor success rate of existing welfare programs, you would think that bureaucrats and politicians would be open to new ideas and concrete suggestions from people who have worked in the field. You would be wrong. Many liberal groups seem like they merely want to double down on the failed programs. That's why Peter Cove's book and ideas deserve a hearing. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. Two brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, in theaters February 22nd.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Melissa Fisher with us today, and if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to talk about some difficult issues here I might mention along the way, and because we're talking about sexual identity, I might even mention the word pornography and a few things like that. Just wanted to give you a parental advisory, but we'll be very careful about how we communicate this, but just thought I would mention that. And let's, if we can now, Melissa, talk about the way of the monster. Okay, this girl that is performing and is pursuing the kind of the way of perfection shows up at a Christian university. Tell us the rest of the story.
So I show up freshman year, high hopes, high goals, like so many college students do. Big goals being I wanted to graduate after making good grades. I wanted to make some great friends. Most of all, I wanted to date in a way that honored God, and I wanted to find that Christian man and get married. And a couple years later, have kids and start down that whole what I would kind of quote-unquote normal road. But what began to sneak out at the beginning, towards the beginning of my college experience, was this same-sex attraction. And at that point, the landscape back in the day was completely different. Not only was same-sex marriage not legal, but same-sex relationships wasn't even talked about at that point. I'd actually, in fact, never even heard the term gay. So when all of this started to kind of well up inside me, the same-sex attraction, I had no idea what to do with it. And once again, kind of under the legalistic framework of perfection, I felt like I had to be perfect. I wasn't allowed to talk about things, much less anything like this coming out. And so it just kind of became this monster that I tried to figure out a way to just shove it down and pretend it wasn't there. and tried to pursue the normal life. But as many of you know that are listening, you can only strive and only kind of pretend and only kind of white knuckle it for so long before that monster that you're trying to hide just kind of grows out of control.
You know, one of the things that we have done over the years at Probe Ministries, which is a group I work with, is a conference called Mind Games Camp. And one of the things we used to do is we would have a seminar, or even when we speak in churches, and it was just called homosexuality. And I noticed not a lot of people were coming. And so one of the speakers there, Sue Boland, will be in studio with us pretty soon again, retitled it, Help My Roommate is Gay. And then everybody came to the group because, as you said, you go back a couple of decades, nobody wanted to talk about it. Now, of course, we talk about grace and truth about LGBT, but it is, I think, the point that you are really bringing out to think about in terms of the church. If the church never addresses the issue, if the Christian university never addresses the issue, if the issue is one that you keep as another one of those secrets or another one of those struggles, it's something you can't even go and talk to somebody about. It, in some respects, is illustrative of why we need to have the church to be a safe place where somebody can say, this is something I'm really dealing with, and I would appreciate prayer for. But back then, nobody, like you said, if you hadn't ever even heard the word gay, you can kind of figure out what you are supposed to do with it. And that is leading to the next chapter, the way of medicating. Tell us more.
Well, when this monster started to pop out, of course, I did everything I could to white knuckle it and tried to, again, follow God or what I thought would make him happy. And that only lasted so long, especially because at one point, kind of everything in my family situation, especially with my mom, kind of blew up. And so I decided that when that happened and when I got really angry at Mom, I got really angry at God. And I said, you know what, forget you both. And at that point, I just kind of walked away from my relationship with Jesus. And when he wasn't God, I started to make myself God. And I threw myself into following my feelings and following after and going after anything that I thought would make me happy. And so I just became an addict. If it felt good, I went for it. So I drank too much. I shopped too much. And then when it came to relationships, I thought, you know what? If there's no God that I need to make happy and I'm going to follow my feelings, I'm going to follow these same-sex attraction feelings, especially because what I didn't realize at the time, but I've come to understand now, having been sexually abused and molested by multiple men early on, even one as far back as my childhood, that was playing on in the background, which made men feel not safe. And so if men aren't safe and I don't have to make God happy, I'm just going to follow these same-sex attraction desires, and started in the same-sex lifestyle up until I found someone that I thought was going to make me happy, and ended up heading to Canada because same-sex marriage wasn't legal at the time, and we got married. And what was interesting at that point, what became really sweet in God's providence is he let me have everything that I wanted that I thought would make me happy. I had the job, the house, the marriage, and kind of realized one day, 6 years later, I'm still not happy. I'm still miserable. What then could be wrong? And kind of became a breaking point or a turning point in my life.
You know, you mentioned something about men, and it's a little bit later in the book, but you had kind of a work project here for, say, you know, men are, men do, you know, all that. And you sort of had the fill in the blank. And so we kind of see how we think about how we'll fill in the blank, then to turn the page and go, whoa, you know, I can see, you know, because it was, you know, men are blank, men are, all men are, men will always, men, and when you're putting down men are bad, men are selfish, narcissistic jerks, men will hurt you and ban you, and all those, I realized what you were dealing with, and obviously you could see why, in some respects, a turning towards same-sex attraction, at least in part, was due to a complete repudiation and anger and maybe even fear of men. Is that fair?
Absolutely true. And what was interesting, because again, in the midst of being in the same-sex lifestyle, I could never have told you these things, especially because I was so just emotionally shut down and I was filled with so much anger that I hadn't realized that I was living under this black and white framework of rules or agreements that I'd made about myself, I'd made about God, I'd made about men. And I also grew up not emotionally close with my mother, even though she was very physically close. So I grew up with this just deep desire for female touch and female nurturing, some stuff that I didn't get from my mom. So it made this really, really weird mix of dynamics that really did kind of stone on stone kind of lay the framework for this path towards same-sex attraction. And again, in the midst of it, couldn't have told you that, because a lot of the things that through counseling, through healing, through some recovery groups and some work I did through church helped bring to the surface some of these repressed memories that at the time I couldn't have told you about because I couldn't remember them.
Yes. And that's part of the issue, is that some people that have gone through this therapy say, I don't know why I'm that way. I was just born that way. And then later, as they go through counseling, like you said, those are repressed memories, and go, oh, now that fits that. And that's another kind of insight from your book, is people would say, and I've heard this all the time, and I just always want to hasten, calm down a little bit here, because people say, if that happened to me, you think I'd remember it. Not necessarily. True?
Yeah. And absolutely true. And I think it's actually one of the beautiful ways God designed us, that he only allows us to remember what we can handle and what we can deal with. And so it's a beautiful design that he designed our brains to kind of repress certain things up until the point that we're emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally healthy enough for that memory to surface, for the Holy Spirit to then get to touch on and heal and bring life and freedom. And another question I often get is, well, not only do I not have any memories, I don't think it was the way I was raised. I don't think it was the way I was nurtured. From birth, I feel like I've felt this way or I've been this way. And you know what? My answer to that is, even if there was nothing that you ever experienced, you grew up in a great home, great family, and there were still gender issues or same-sex attraction issues that you grew up, you know what? We were all born under the fall.
Right.
We were all born dead and needing to be given new life. And so even if as far back as from birth, you can't point to anything, we're all still in need of Jesus giving us a new heart, and then spending the rest of our lives allowing that heart to grow and be sanctified. And so that's why so much time is needed to really understand, God, was there anything that led me down this path or towards this attraction? And if not, your word says you've given me a new heart, that you're going to give me a way out. You're going to make a way that there is hope. And so I can trust you with whatever my temptation or my struggle is today, because you're working to bring about a new heart for me tomorrow.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. Melissa Fisher with us as we talk about the way of hope, a fresh perspective on sexual identity, same-sex marriage, and the church. We have a link, and you might want to go to that while we go to a break here. GoTheWayOfHope.com. You don't have to remember all the words, because we have a link there. That will give you a chance to find out more about the book, to find out more about Melissa, and we'll come back and talk about some of the resources that are available at that website, some of the blog posts and other resources. So if you would like to do that during the break, feel free to do so. If you'd like to give us a call, we have a lot more of the story to tell, but we'd also like to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, and a little bit later, take those phone calls right after this.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Melissa Fisher, author of the book The Way of Hope, published by our good friends at Baker Books. And just before we get back to the book, I thought we might mention for a few minutes, Melissa, some of the things that are available on your website, gothewayofhope.com. Obviously, people can get a book there. They can find out a little bit more about you, schedule you perhaps to speak. You have blog posts, but talk about what is available to some of our listeners if they personally, or if they in their area of ministry, could be a small group leader, a church leader, maybe even a pastor, would want to understand some of these issues. What is available to some of our listeners today?
I appreciate the question. One little caveat I'll throw in real quick is my website is under a little bit of construction, so in the next few weeks there will be some more things new and updated put out there. But the biggest thing I would say is just contact. I know that there's so many church leaders that want to be better equipped, whether it's just a lay leader or if you're on staff at a church that are listening, that you have questions about something that's going on at your church, or you're just a regular follower of Christ looking to understand and have some more clarity put out about a specific situation. I would love nothing more than for you to email me and let's have a discussion if there's other places that I can point you to, or we can be in dialogue together about what God's up to in specific situations, because when it comes to sexuality and gender issues, gender confusion, sexuality confusion, there's so many specific stories that really do require so many different answers for ways in which the Holy Spirit might want to move and show up in each situation. So would love your questions, would love your feedback, and you can do that at my website, Go the Way of Hope.
Well, again, let's, if we can, get back to the book, The End of My Ways. Okay, you're in the 6th year of a relationship with Christy, and things kind of change. So talk about that.
So 6 years into medicating, 6 years into being my own God, following my own way, over the course of, I don't remember if it was weeks or months, but really I just realized that I was still absolutely unhappy. And so being the immature person that I was at the time, when you're unhappy, what do? You look around and see who you can blame in your life. So I started to blame my partner at the time because I was figuring out it must be her fault. That's the reason I am unhappy. And so I actually cheated on her. The relationship blew up, the marriage ended, and I got kicked out of my friend circle because of the way I'd acted. All these things just kind of dominoes, just kind of one at a time, fell so perfectly that I ended up kind of basically train wrecking my life and found myself in this moment where I realized, you know what? Everything that got me to this point was actually stuff that I had chosen, I had decided. And it was this beautiful moment where I kind of reached the end of myself and realized that when it came to figuring out what was best for me, I made a really lousy God. And so it was kind of the first moment that I kind of had this, well, if I can't even trust me, who could I trust? And it was kind of this question that popped up in my head of, maybe I've got God wrong. Maybe he can help me. Maybe he really does see me. Maybe he doesn't expect me to always show up perfectly. And maybe he might see me in this mess and actually be able to help me figure out a next step that I could take. And so it was just kind of this beautiful breaking moment of reaching the worst moment of my life.
And God showed up. So that brings us into some of the areas of hope, which, again, didn't want to go down the dark path too much longer, but you have chapters on the way of hope and the way of community. But talk about that, because you realize that God wanted you to go back to church. Now, I again think a lot of people go, oh, no big deal. No, I can imagine the emotional hurdle that was for you, given all the things that have preceded it. And again, this is a family-oriented program, so we left out a few things that would have even been more affecting you than maybe the listeners might understand. So to say God wanted me to go back to church is like, oh, I'm not sure I can even get my mind over that. Help us understand that experience.
Growing up under the legalistic framework that I did, I understood how wrong it was to even drink, and how people that drank were judged, or how people that did this were judged, or people that did that were judged, and what church people thought about them. And so in my mind, I had thought, wow, if those are bad, what will church people think about this thing that nobody wants to talk about, nobody wants around. Nobody wants to be around people that struggle with same-sex attraction or that have been in the gay lifestyle. And so the thought of going back to church honestly scared me to death, because church was filled with church people, and I used to be one of them. I knew how they showed up. I knew, or at least thought I knew, how they would show up and how they would act. But in God's beautiful design, after trying a couple of churches and helping me to be brave and actually get into the doors, he led me to Gateway Church in Austin, Texas, where I just found a beautiful community of people that let me come and let me be imperfect, because they realized they were imperfect, and helped me step by step find a community and find friendships and find relationships, and most of all, just find space. That no one was there trying to fix me. No one was there trying to tell me how I needed to do X, Y, Z, but most of all, they were just there just cheering me along and giving me space while I learned to listen to the Holy Spirit, to see what the Holy Spirit wanted to do next in my faith journey.
Let's talk about the value of community. I think we have talked about that so often here on the program, but one of the lines you use is, for you Lone Ranger types, here's the warning. The sheep living away from the flock is always the easiest for the wolf to pick off. So often, Melissa, people say, well, what do I need to do? And I think it's a pronoun problem. It's what we need to do, and that is, community is essential really in any kind of brokenness. But if I can dare make a comment that might even sound heretical, I think it's even more important when you're dealing with sexual issues and needing community and affirmation and accountability and those kinds of things. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely agree. In fact, this morning I was listening to a talk from Timothy Keller titled An Immigrant's Courage, looking at the book of Ruth and Naomi's friendship, and he was talking about how the most powerful thing isn't usually a sermon or isn't a book or isn't a talk, it's actually friendship. And how when you're trying to walk out sexual purity and sexual freedom, regardless of what your struggle is, because maybe it is porn, maybe it is same-sex attraction, or maybe you've been so wounded you've shut down your sexuality and you feel God wanting to encourage you to get back in the dating game or step into whatever he has for you. We all need each other, and I think that's the most beautiful thing about being a part of a local church that is a place where you're going to receive grace and truth and be led by the Holy Spirit and by deep friendship towards the more that he has for you. Because I do believe John 10:10 says that he wants an abundant life for us, and that he has that for us, and that does include our sexualities. But we need each other to be able to get to that spot.
One of the things you talk about is the benefit of community. Benefit number one, that community comforts us. Benefit number two, community carves us. Benefit number three, community covers us. And so it seems to me that in some respects there is a natural tendency when we have a problem to solve it on our own. But there are some ways in which community can help you solve the problem in ways that you can never solve it by yourself.
Absolutely. And what's interesting, having stepped outside our Western culture here in America and traveled around the world and gotten to see what communities and churches are like globally, it's interesting how much of a challenge that we have here in our Western culture and our Western individualistic society, where, again, I'm a Texas girl. I learned from an early age, you pull up yourselves by your bootstraps, and that literally was a pair of cowgirl boots. But that isn't how God designed us. And that, I think, oftentimes we don't realize how frail and fragile we are, that we do need each other to help comfort and carve and draw us into what he has for us next.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, continue our conversation of the Way of Hope, a fresh perspective on sexual identity, same-sex marriage, and the church. It's published by Baker Books, and we're going to talk about the way of work and the way of more work, as well as the way of bravery. We've done our best to try to summarize 10 chapters, but the only way you can really understand all this is to dig in and read the book, and so that's one of the reasons we wanted to feature it today. But again, my vision is for a church, all churches, to be a safe place where we emphasize both truth and love, to speak the truth in love. So we have our biblical compassion and we have our biblical convictions. And so our truth is our convictions and our love is our compassion. And this is, I think, something that will be helpful for those of you in leadership. It would certainly be helpful for any of us that have friends that maybe are dealing with same-sex attraction. And so let me encourage, and of course it's really essential for somebody who is same-sex attracted. So these are resources we want to make available. We'll continue our conversation with Melissa Fisher right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1919, American mothers who lost their sons in World War I set about developing a war memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland. And there it has stood in peaceful silence for over 90 years, a visible reminder of the cost of freedom. But in October of 2017, a 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit reasoned that because these mothers chose to memorialize their sons with a cross-shaped monument reminiscent of the grave markers of the thousands of American soldiers buried across Europe, the monument violates the Constitution. Not all the judges agreed. Chief Judge Gregory issued a strong dissent, reminding the court that the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment does not require the government to purge any reference to religion from the public square. He concluded, quote, "This memorial stands in witness to the valor, endurance, courage, and devotion of the 49 residents of Prince George's County, Maryland, who lost their lives in the Great War for the liberty of the world. I cannot agree that a monument so conceived and dedicated and that bears such witness violates the letter or spirit of the very Constitution these heroes died to defend," unquote. We agree with Judge Gregory. This is a veterans memorial. We will not break faith with the Gold Star mothers and the American Legion veterans who chose to remember their sons and brothers with this cross-shaped memorial. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back with Melissa Fisher for a few more minutes as we talk about the way of hope. And in your chapters on the way of work, it's interesting what you start with, and that is the questions of Jesus. Now, we've had on this program a number of conversations over the years about the fact that Jesus asked a lot of questions, but some of them, when I was first became a Christian, seemed kind of odd. Asking somebody who is blind, do you want to be healed, or do you believe that I can heal you? asking a person who's paralyzed, do you want to be healed as they're sitting by this pool? It seems like kind of an odd question, but it's a really important one because sometimes people don't. And this is, I think, the question you suggest that we need to ask ourselves. Do you believe that Jesus is able to heal your marriage? Do you believe that Jesus is able to forgive so reconciliation can occur? Do you believe that I am able to heal your son? That's kind of the starting point for some of the things that you had to deal with, right, Melissa?
Absolutely, because when I look back to my early 20s when the monster kind of first came out, I would say that I would want healing. I would have thought that. I would have said that out loud if I'd ever found someone brave enough and safe enough to really talk to. But it isn't what I wanted most. What I wanted most actually was still to protect my image. And so that was the thing that I wanted more than I actually wanted healing. So I think when it comes to questions, I love how Jesus always showed up with a question of, what do you really want? And as you start to look at that, is that really the desire of your heart, that regardless of the cost, God, regardless of who I need to share, regardless of how this shatters my image or my pride, this is the thing I want most. I want you. I want freedom around this. And then it really does become, as you look at him, do you really think that he's able? Is he a God that is so powerful that he could bring healing? Is he a God that's so gentle that as he does it, he'll make you feel more loved than you ever had before? Like, do you really believe, as you explore the nature and the truth about who Jesus is, that he really is all that he says he is?
Well, and again, this is called the way of work. You have a section here, let's get real. And because a lot of people say, yeah, but I don't, does it take work? I mean, yes. And that's, I think, something I want maybe you to address for just a minute, this whole idea of the struggle and the difficulty, because the non-Christian view is, pray away the gay, or, you guys just believe that it's all going to be easy. And I'll be the first to admit that sometimes this is hard to understand. I have met people who, the moment they became a Christian, never had same-sex attraction. I have met people that the moment they became a Christian, had been an alcoholic, never wanted to drink again. But that is the extreme rarity. The reality is, dare I use a big theological word, sanctification takes time and patience. Talk about that, if you might.
Absolutely. When it comes to my healing journey, I know many people just want God to heal it and fix it and do it quickly. They're looking for that silver bullet, that magic fairy dust kind of an answer. And as you mentioned, I absolutely do believe that instantly Jesus heals and still does miracles today, but he does it more rarely. And that so many stories, including my own, it's a process, and it's one that takes time. For me, it took years of uncovering father wounds and mother wounds and sexual abuse wounds and lies I was believing about God, about myself, and I am still on a healing and freedom journey. I know that my gender identity and my sexuality is one that is still being sanctified, still being shaped. Do I struggle with same-sex attraction today? I don't today. But do I still know that God, as a woman, desiring a heterosexual relationship and marriage that's holy and God-honoring, is that still being formed and shaped, and is it still taking me work? Absolutely, and I'm actually thankful for it. I'm so glad mine wasn't a miraculous over the night kind of instantaneous healing, because I think it's allowed me to have a deeper faith, to my roots to go deeper into the ground, and I hope in the process helping me to be able to bear more fruit, because I've held on to him longer and tighter because of it.
One of the things that is a very nice diagram in your book, and probably if I'd had to do over again, we could put this up on some of the slides, but it's behold, believe, and then behave. Talk us through that for just a minute, just before I wind down today, because that's an important principle of behold, then believe, and behave. And once we get that in the right order, a lot of things do begin to fall into place, don't they?
And that diagram's based off of 2 Corinthians 3:18 that talks about how when one beholds the image of God, that they go from one degree of glory to another, that so many of us not even realizing that walk around with this construct or this framework, which we kind of subconsciously see or behold God off of, this kind of Santa Claus image or this angry dictator image or this kind of passive, he's not really going to do much image, that how we behold him or how we think about him or how we see him really, or see ourselves, but mostly him, really starts to lay the framework of what we start to believe, and how we believe shapes how we behave. So if you're wanting to change your behavior, I always recommend, hey, let's go look at what are you really believing about yourself, or what are you really believing about God? And then backtrack even to, well, how do you see yourself as a man or as a woman or as a child, or how do you even see God? Describe him. What is he really like to you if you were given permission to really say the truth and not have to give kind of what you think the right answer should be? So I think for me in my healing journey, I've had others that helped me understand that process, help walk me through that process, and I know has helped bring healing and freedom to my sexuality.
And again, I recognize that some of our listeners would like to talk with you, maybe schedule you to speak, or in some way or another say, yeah, I'll get a copy of the book, but I also like to contact you. So let's one more time talk about what's available on your website, gothewayofhope.com. As you, of course, issued a little bit of disclaimer, there'll be more in the future. And, of course, that's one of the things I always tell people. Visit a website more than once, because oftentimes new material's being added all the time. But as people go there, talk about some of the resources that are available to some of our listeners.
So in my blog post, there is a couple of writing pieces. I've been working on another book this past year, so working on getting that edited and in the process, but some of my kind of previous blog pieces, if you really want to know kind of some of the intricate feelings and thinkings of what around sexuality, some of those pieces are there, as well as some of the past speaking engagements that I've done at various churches, as well as just the place to contact me. So if you have a question on how to love your family member, if you have a question about this situation with a friend or a neighbor, or if, hey, this is showing up in your own life, and you want to know how to be equipped, or you just want to dialogue about it, or if you'd like for me to come speak at your church, I would love for you to contact me via the website at gothewayofhope.com.
And as you pointed out, the book's been out for a while, so if you can't find it in the bookstore, we have a link there as well. The Way of Hope, a fresh perspective on sexual identity, same-sex marriage, and the church. Melissa Fisher, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me, Kirby.
We're going to take a break, and tomorrow we will spend some time focusing on our weekend edition. And there's been a lot of issues in the news. Really didn't spend much time today talking about the deal for building the wall, as well as an update on some of these religious liberty issues that we've talked about. Stephen Forbes will be with us for a while, so we're going to be talking about this idea of a Green New Deal and a number of other issues. So there's a lot that we will cover tomorrow. So I hope you'll join us here at Point of View. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like some more information, you can go to the website, pointofview.net, and find information about the 3 different authors that we've interviewed. You can find out more about this trip to Israel taking place this fall. And so go to pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll take a break, and we'll be back tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Question, do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.